Hello everyone, this is Dr. Stevens with a lecture on APA documentation. APA stands for the American Psychological Association. Documentation means simply the information that you give when you are doing any kind of academic writing on the outside sources that you reference or refer to in the text of your paper. So let's get started. First of all, this lecture is also related to the assignment to write an annotated bibliography. So we will be going over the assignment instructions for the bibliography. Secondly, we are not going to talk about all aspects of APA documentation here. And by the way, this is sometimes called APA style. And I should have mentioned that the American Psychological Association is a professional organization that sets guidelines for research and documentation in the social sciences. Not the humanities, such as English and literature and that sort of thing, but if you're taking sociology, political science, anthropology, and a lot of other related subjects, you will be asked to use APA style, and many of you are familiar with that already. But anyway, back to what I was saying, we're not going to cover all aspects of APA. We're going to be looking primarily at the list of references. And the reason we're doing that is that you need the information on a list of references for your annotated bibliography. All right, so let's get started. In this lecture, then, we will be looking at the instructions for the annotated bibliography because that is very, very important for an understanding of documentation, and we can learn about documentation by talking about that assignment. I'm going to look at what I call the APA checklist. When we look at the APA checklist, we will look at the fact that APA documentation is actually two parts. There are two parts to the documentation system. I want you, this is very important, I want you to refer to the Little Seagull Handbook, pages 136 and following. That is your chapter on APA documentation. This is required reading. So as you do the assignments in this course that require some form of documentation, exercises and papers and so on, just assume that I am assuming that you have done this reading or that you at least know to refer to this chapter when you have questions. Certainly you can always ask questions of me, but there are some basics here that you need to know, and you won't always have access to me readily, so you should be able to use the Little Seagull Handbook to find the information that you need. For the list of references, go to the Little Seagull Handbook, pages 144 through 162. That gives you information on the list of references. We will be going over the entry in an annotated bibliography or a list of references. All right, there is an entry for each source, and so we're going to look at the information required, and then we will be looking at formatting. Let me go back to this point about the two parts. All right, there are two parts to the APA documentation system. There is the list of references that goes at the end of your paper, and then there are the in-text citations. So right in the text of your paper where you make reference to an outside source, you insert an in-text citation, and that citation then points to the list of references. We are not going to be looking at in-text citations in this particular lecture. We're focusing, as I said, on the list of references because that's the information that you need for the annotated bibliography. All right, I want then to switch over now to the APA checklist. You have this in the course, the Blackboard course site. Under course documents, you will find your own copy of the APA documentation checklist. All right? So make sure that you access that so that you'll have a copy and know where to get it when you need it, whether you want to print it out or just download it to your computer, whatever you want to do. But make sure that you've got a copy and that you have access to it. Use this checklist, folks, before you submit any kind of assignment in this course that requires documentation. And use it by going through the checklist, each item in the checklist, and checking off that item against your own documentation. In other words, did you do that particular thing, that particular item correctly in your documentation? It's like proofreading. In this case, you're proofreading your documentation. All right, I want to go through the highlighted items here. First of all, APA documentation is an in-text documentation system. I already told you what in-text documentation means, or in-text citation. It's not a footnote system. Do not use footnotes. No footnotes, no endnotes, no notes with numbers or anything like that. Superscripts, subscripts, stars, double stars, okay? No notes. And this will become clear to you as we work on documentation in the course and as we go through this checklist. All right, but in the checklist, I'm going to focus only on those things that are important for the list of references. So first of all, name your sources correctly. All right? Sources of information, whether it's a book, whether it's an article, whether it's a website, no matter what it is, you always use the author's last name, meaning this is how you list it. It's the first thing that you see in a list of references. Let's look at what I mean. We're going to scroll down here to the end where I've got a sample list of references. See this? References, right? Okay. Author's last name. Gilliard. Author's last name. Gould. Author's last name. Kincaid. The first thing that the reader sees in the list of references is the name under which that source is listed. And that source is always going to be listed under the last name of the author. I don't want to see anything else out here, all right? I don't want to see the URL. I don't want to see the title. I don't want to see the publisher. I don't want to see the date. The very first thing is the author's last name. But you guessed it, there are exceptions. We have an exception right here. Please note the exceptions. If you are using a reference, and by reference I mean something like a dictionary, an encyclopedia, something like Garner's Modern American Usage, right, which is a handbook of language use. Whenever you are using a reference, and a handy way to understand this is one of those books in which everything is listed alphabetically, just like in a dictionary, right? The words are all listed alphabetically. Dictionary begins with A, goes through Z, and so on, all right? When you are taking something from a reference work, such as a definition of a word, or from an encyclopedia, an article on something like an article on documentation, whatever it is, you do not use the author's last name. Remember, we're talking about exceptions here. You use the title of the entry in that reference work. In this particular case, as an example, I'm using the entry from Garner's Modern American Usage. I'm using the entry, which would be alphabetical in that book, about sexism in language. And that article is called Sexism, so that's how it's listed here. Now, there are other exceptions, right? So let's go back to number 1 here. Or number 2, rather. Always use the author's last name except where the author is unknown, right? And I'm sure you were thinking, oh, Dr. Stevens, what do I do if I don't know who the author is? Okay? When the author is unknown, use the title of the source. If it's a book, use the book title. If it's an article, use the article title. If it's actually a website that doesn't, in other words, it's not a specific book or article that you've gotten on the internet or that you've gotten from the library, but it's actually a website, then use the name of the website. But that's kind of your default when you don't have the author's last name or the author's name. Finally, in APA, only the last name is spelled out. After the last name, the name is followed by the author's initials, not the full first name of the author. Again, you can see this in our example. If we scroll down, you can see this in our sample list of references, Gilliard K, Holstein D, and so on. Gould, well, Gould's first name happens to be Stephen, but we don't spell out Stephen. Kincaid, all right? Kincaid's first name happens to be Jamaica, all right? We don't spell out Jamaica, we just give her the J, all right? Moving right along. Next highlighted item would be item 7. We're talking about format here, folks. Format. Do you use the correct format? Spacing. Double space. In APA manuscript style, it is double spacing. Your list of references is double spaced. If you don't double space your list of references, you will be penalized. It will reduce your grade. Okay? A common mistake is to single space the individual entries and double space between them. That's a no. Okay? Format again. Hanging indentation. Hanging indentation is the opposite of paragraph indentation. Paragraph indentation, the first line is indented. Hanging indentation, everything except the first line is indented. Scrolling down again to our sample, notice how it works. Notice this entry for Kincaid here. Kincaid, out to the left margin, right? Everything else indented. In a word processor, be sure to use the hanging indentation function. In Microsoft Word, for example, you go into the paragraph features under the Home tab and you look for spacing and you set your spacing to hanging. Do not use the tab key. Do not use the space bar. If you use the tab key or the space bar, anytime you make any kind of change to the text of your references, you will mess up the formatting because the indentation will no longer be in the correct place. in a word processor. You are not using a typewriter. You cannot indent. You cannot indent a paragraph in hanging indentation. You cannot indent by using your space key and your tab key. Okay. Format. So make sure you use the correct format. Alphabetical order. Oh, you wouldn't know how upset Dr. Stevens becomes when he sees a list of references that uses numbers. No. The order in an APA list of references is alphabetical order. It is not numerical order. Put things in alphabetical order. Again, our sample, we begin with G, we go to K, we go to SE, we go to ST, and I think that's the last one, right? Okay. Alphabetical order, not numerical order. And let's see. Include all the necessary information. We'll see some more of this, I hope, when we get to the sample reference list in the assignment instructions. But this is the basic information. For an entry in a list of references, it's the author, the title, the date, and the city and state of publication, and then the name of the publisher. Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 basic items of information. Author, title, date, city and state, that is the location where it's published, and then the name of the publisher. That's your basic information. Make sure you've got it all. Okay? Online sources, these are the killer. All right? Let's begin with the most common mistake. The most common mistake when you are listing in your references an online source is to use the URL as the name of the source. That is a no-no. All right, this is a URL, Uniform Resource Locator. It's the thing that goes in the browser URL box at the top of your browser when you want to look for a specific website. That's a URL. All right, it is certainly important information, but it is not the name of your source. All right, let's look at an example. And by the way, please use this particular source for information about documentation. It's an excellent backup for the Little Seagull Handbook, and here is the information on it. Okay, this is an online source. It's on the web. It gives you excellent information on APA style, and it is by Diana Hacker, all right, and B. Pfister. All right, those are the authors of this particular website. The title is Researching in the Social Sciences, and then, all right, there is the URL. So we are including the URL. Now notice that there is no publisher given here. In this particular case, we are treating the publisher as, we're treating the URL as the publisher. All right, we've got a title, we've got an author, and we have this other piece of information here. Now, there is no city or state or name of publisher because this thing was published right on the internet. And by the way, it was published by BedfordSt.Martins.com. All right, so in many cases with an online source, you do not have a city and state of publication. So keep that in mind. What you do have is this business about retrieved, okay? So, retrieved on 9th of March 2012 from, right? And from this particular URL. I'm giving the location on the internet. So that's important. All right. So while we're talking about online sources, let's just go through this. All right. We've already talked about the author. All right. The publication date. Now, if there is no date of publication, you use the initials ND for no date. That simply tells the reader that when you retrieved this particular information from the internet, the site that you retrieved it from is an undated site, where the information had no date. Researching in the social sciences is the title, goes right after the date, or ND, and then finally we talked about the date of retrieval. Moving along to item 15, do you use the correct format for titles of sources? In the list of references, titles of short items such as essays are capitalized the same as book titles, but are not italicized. Book titles are italicized. All right? In APA format, use capital letters only in the first word of the title. This is different from practice in other formats and other documentation styles. The most common format for writing out the title of a book, for example, is to capitalize all of the first letters of all of the major words in the title. So let's look at what I mean by going again to our handy-dandy list of references. Let's take this first entry by Gilliard, Holstein, and Schuster. Rhetorical Choices, a Reader for Writers. That's the name of a book, right? Notice that it is in italics. Notice that only the first word is capitalized. All the other words are lowercase. And then let's look at the title of an essay by Mr. Gould here, right? Women's Brains. It's a short piece. It's an article. It's an essay, not a book. All right? So just as with books, only the first word is capitalized. Brains is not. But notice that it is not in italics. It's in regular font. All right. That's the APA checklist. Use it. Let's go back to the annotated bibliography and look at that assignment. Now, what you will see when you download, and I hope that you will be sure to download and study the assignment instructions. What you will see is you'll see information on the due date and the reference. Okay? The Little Seagull Handbook, pages 54 to 58, gives you some information on annotated bibliographies. There's an explanation of the assignment. I'm just giving you the big picture here, folks. What we want to look at is the list of references, some information on sources, and then finally the instructions for the bibliography. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at an actual annotated bibliography. And let's just scroll through this so you can see. You can see what it looks like. We're just looking now, okay? I'm not telling you what we're seeing. We're just looking. Okay, we'll look some more, see what it looks like. visually, because this is one of the things I do when I grade folks. I just look at what you've got because I can see a lot just by looking without even reading. Okay, bibliography. Now, what is an annotated bibliography? A bibliography is simply a list of books. Well, books and articles and other items like that, all right? It's a list of sources of information. And there are lots and lots and lots of kinds of bibliography. We are talking about bibliographies for research. So, your bibliography is a list of books and articles and other sources that you are using for your research in English 102. And here they are. All right? Here are your sources. Something by J.A. Arthur, something by B. Asherbronner, and so on. T. Falola. Okay? It's a list of sources. But it's an annotated bibliography. Oh, what does that mean? An annotated bibliography includes a brief note that describes the source. So, in this particular case, for example, we've got a book called Invisible Sojourners, African American Immigrant Diaspora in the United States. Oops, look, there's a mistake here, isn't there? My mistake, I got to correct this. What's the mistake here? You should be able to pick it out by now, right? African Immigrant Diaspora should be lowercase. Sojourners should be lowercase. United States would not be lowercase because it's a proper name. So if you've got a proper name in the title, that's a different thing. But anyway, so what we're saying is that J.A. Arthur in this book examines the reasons Native Americans have such a difficult time assimilating with members of the host society, and so on. All right, it's a very, very brief note, hence annotation, a brief note that explains what the source is. Now, what does this have to do with APA documentation? Because your annotated bibliography uses the same kind of information and formatting as your list of references in your research paper. Same thing. So basically the annotated bibliography is just like a list of references. The only difference is this note here. Okay, that's the only difference between this and a regular list of references. So folks, everything that I told you about that list of references and all of that information in the checklist about references applies to your annotated bibliography. Use that information. Let's go back. You begin your annotated bibliography. Whoops, what happened? Okay, I don't know what happened there. I was writing here. You begin. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I know what's happening. Okay. What's happening is that Microsoft Word wants to center because everything's centered here. I think that's what's happening. Microsoft Word wants to center what I'm writing here. Okay, you've got a cover page. All right, you got a cover page. I'm going to stop trying to write on this. Okay, I'm just going to assume that you see that. You have a cover page. Cover page includes the title of the bibliography. It includes your name. It includes the course. It includes the professor's name. It includes the date. All right. And as I say, Microsoft Word wants to put all these check marks somewhere else. Well, I'll just let it do that. We're not going to worry. Okay. You have a brief introductory paragraph that tells you what this bibliography is. This bibliography is a list of sources for a research project. What research project? You need to name the research project. What's it about? Hostility between Native Africans and African Americans, or whatever your topic is. All right? And then we want to know what the research question is. Doesn't have to be a long paragraph, but it has to do those things. It has to identify this as a bibliography. It needs to say what the research project is. It needs to say what the research question is. All right. So remember that. There will be opportunity to discuss this assignment in discussion online, all right, when we see each other online. So I'm not going to go over all of the details here, but remember, the main thing is, in this lecture, we're talking about APA documentation. We're focusing on the information and format and other aspects of the list of references, and you are using that information. You are using the reference list for your annotated bibliography. The big difference is that you are adding to your reference list, you are adding the annotations. As we conclude, let's just go over a few things that you might be asking about right now. You might want to know something about sources. This is important. Your sources can be internet sources. They can be print sources from the library. They can be books. They can be articles. They must be traditional sources, meaning that they have some kind of scholarly authority. They are authoritative. And what does this mean? Authoritative. Okay. Authoritative traditionals. Okay. Sources. Here we go. Sources traditionally used for scholarly research. All right. Wikipedia? No. A blog? No. All right. Things like that. Student articles that you might find on the internet? No. Not traditional, not authoritative. Oh, here we go. Here's my explanation of authoritative. Authoritative simply means that the information is reliable and accurate, and it's reliable and accurate according to certain scholarly standards. Now, I'm not going to go over all of the instructions, but you're going to certainly ask how many items you must have. And where does it say that? Okay. Well, you need 5 sources. Somewhere in the instructions it tells you how many sources you need. I hope it does. All right. Okay, well, I can't find that right now. But all right. 5 sources for the annotated bibliography. And finally, remember, when it comes to the annotated bibliography, we are talking about sources that you will be using for the research you do in English 102 and that you will use when you are writing your research paper. All right, folks, thanks for listening. Use that APA checklist. I'll see you in discussion.